my final comment, and I come from a tradition where, especially if you were a quote unquote, your basic work was in your mind and not with your hands or with a rifle. You're supposed to always end on a positive note. So my great friend, my dear mentor, Paul Sweezy, the greatest of American Marxist economists, he would always end with, but the forces of history and capitalism, it's inevitable that's going to be overthrown. And for people my age, I really needed to hear that. This positive view of the future. One of the things that separates our generation from everyone that preceded it, if you're on the left, is all preceding generations had absolute belief that history was on their side and that they would win. We would win. History was on our side. And the same thing even with Martin Luther King. The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. There's always, and our generation has, for good reason, lost the belief, the conviction that we have the force of history behind us. We have the force of justice behind us. Our generation, or your generation, it believes there's a good chance we'll be defeated. There's a good chance we're not going to win. The only thing I can say as a conclusion is you never know. You see, you don't know. You can know one thing for certain. If you do nothing, it can only get worse. If you do nothing, it can only get worse, because that greed on the other side is insatiable. The moment that Kamala Harris was nominated, immediately the billionaire class said, what are you going to do with capital gains? You have to reduce the taxes on capital gains. Always the greed. They don't have enough money. They never have enough. So if you don't fight, if you don't resist, if you are passive, it can only get worse. And if you resist, there are moments where it looks very grim. And then there's that folk song, it's always darkest before the dawn. It's this hope that keeps me carrying on. It's always darkest before the dawn. And I look at the examples, if you go to 1860, right? Frederick Douglass writes an essay and he says it's hopeless. We tried what was called back then moral suasion, convincing people of the wrongness of slavery. We spoke here, we rallied there, we put our lives on the line because a lot of people didn't want to hear that message about slavery being wrong. And he said, we lost. We have to accept it. And then the Civil War happens. Couldn't predict it. It was impossible to predict. The worst years of apartheid were emergency rule in the 1980s. It looked like apartheid had won. And you can name 1,000 examples where it's darkest before the dawn. So I'm not going to say, as they said in the past, when Rosa Luxemburg is in jail and every World War I happens, which was totally shattering for that generation. You know the expression, they call that generation that passed through World War I, they call it the lost generation, because they were so shattered by the vast destruction of European civilization. Okay? And she's sitting in jail, and she always says, I find hope in the subterranean forces at work, namely history is on our side. We may not see it, but it's the subterranean, the forces below the surface that are at work, and they're on our side. We don't have that. We don't have that faith that subterranean forces are at work. But there's still the knowledge that you really don't know what will come next. But what you can say with certainty is if you do nothing, not only nothing will happen, it'll get worse. It'll get worse. So that's my final message. I'm not going to say history is on our side because I'm not convinced of it, and I don't believe I will convince anyone else in the face of reality. What I would say is it's worth the try that we might win. It's worth the effort. And there's another reality. There's something in the human constitution that simply can't do nothing
Yes.
in the face of such death and devastation. You just can't. I don't watch it. I don't look at it. I know it's there. I don't want to see it. I block it all out and I just do my work. I just do my work. I don't want to see it. I know it's there. But in the face of knowing it's there, to just go on as if nothing is happening, I think that the whole human constitution rebels against that. So it's not really a choice. Last word, when the Spanish Civil War happened, Paul Robeson, who you can inform your listeners after I leave, he went to perform for the troops on the front line during the Spanish Civil War. And he made a famous line, and it's engraved on his tombstone. It said, an artist must elect to fight for freedom or for slavery. I have made my decision. I had no choice. I've always liked that line because it embodies my spirit. I have made my decision as if he had a choice, as if it were his will. Semicolon, I had no choice. Well, if you had no choice, then you didn't make a decision. And that's sort of been my whole life. On the one hand, I chose to do what I did. Theoretically, I could have become a banker. But even as theoretically, it was an act of will. It was a choice. I know that in light of what my parents endured during World War II, I had no choice. It wasn't a decision I made. It wasn't an act of will, a decision. I had no choice. And so, speaking personally, when I said the human constitution rebels at doing nothing in the face of such death and destruction, I think most normal people will say, you know what, maybe I should go to that demonstration.